Hi, I'm Deborah Hutton, your host for the Wynnsday 2012 Masterclass. And we're coming to you here from Wynn's Coonawarra Estate in beautiful South Australia. All you have to do is settle in, relax, as we explore 8 wines from this year's new vintage releases. We're all very excited to be here. Of course, there's been much anticipation around this year's release, particularly the 55th vintage of the Wynn's Coonawarra Estate Black Label Cabernet Sauvignon, and the inaugural release, of course there'll be much chat about that, of the Wynn's Black Label Shiraz. First and foremost, celebrating her 20th vintage, which is quite remarkable, one of Australia's most respected winemakers. Would you please welcome Wynn's senior winemaker, Sue Hodder. So, okay, having a profound understanding of the cultural history of the Coonawarra and what makes this such a landmark wine region, Wynn's viticulturist Alan Jenkins. Alan, it's great to see you here again. And one of Australia's leading authorities on Australian wine. He's written something like 65 books, just released the 2013 Australian Wine Companion. We have all visited his website at some stage. He's now getting even more high-tech. He's just released his new app, and a little bit of a plug here, his autobiography has just been released called A Life in Wine. Would you please welcome James Halliday? One of the country's most influential wine writers, critics and educators, Jeremy Oliver. So in today's masterclass, we'll be tasting 8 wines. We have 4 from the first bracket, which is the full vintage Shiraz, the new vintage Shiraz, and the 4 Cabernet Sauvignon new releases in the second bracket. Let's go to our first wine, which is the Wynn's Coonawarra Estate Shiraz 2011. As we discussed, it's a cool climate style, very refreshing, medium-bodied wine. It will age gracefully, obviously, but has enough upfront character to be enjoyed from release. Sue, I think it's fair to say that 2011 was pretty tough conditions for most winemakers. How do you think that played out with this particular vintage?
Yes, 2011 was certainly challenging vintage, and we were very judicious in the fruit that we did pick. We just had a very clear idea that whatever grapes we picked, we had to make good wine out of.
Well, I think we all would like to move on now to one of the biggest stories today is really the inaugural release of the Wynn's Coonawarra Estate Black Label Shiraz 2010. So I'd have to ask you, first and foremost, the question would have to be why? Why are you releasing the Black Label Shiraz?
Yes, well, it was obviously a very big decision to make to put a Shiraz alongside our most important wine, which is our Wynn's Black Label Cabernet. And it's one that we didn't take lightly, but we do have a lot of vineyard that is very strong, and Alan's input in particular has really whipped them into shape, so to speak. And the last decade has been warmer, and this has augured very well for Coonawarra Shiraz, and the fact that the early history of the region was all about Shiraz, or Hermitage as we called it.
James, you have any thoughts on this? Is it's quite a big moment for the Black Label Shiraz. Your initial thoughts on the tasting?
terrific wine. I hit it blind in a tasting I don't know, months ago, and my head snapped back. I thought, wow, what is this? And I think, Jeremy, you had the same experience.
Well, we're going to move on now to the Wynns Coonawarra Estate V&A Lane Shiraz 2010. And Jeremy, how do you think this holds up, particularly in China, which you're doing some work for, and obviously everyone's very interested in going into the Asian market. How do you think this holds up, and what's their appeal? What's their palate?
Oh, the Chinese palate is such a varied thing because simply it's such a huge place. And but the thing that a lot of people don't expect is with an Asian culture is that the Chinese are used to drinking very strong tea. And they use the leaves of good tea quite a bit. So they're used to tannin, they're used to structure, and there's no need to be shy with it. This wine is a very silky, fine and incredibly spicy wine.
Well, let's move on now to the Wynns Coonawarra Estate Michael Shiraz 2009. How does this stand, Jeremy, I'll ask you, or James, how does it stand with the previous Michael release?
Well, difference in year, cool year 09, was celebrated and much talked about, warm to, depends where you were, warm to hot, 08. This is a beautiful Michael.
All right, we're going to move on now to our second bracket, which is the Cabernet Sauvignon releases, and they all carry the very distinctive Wynns Cabernet style. Okay, so let's move on now to the Wynns Coonawarra Estate V&A Cabernet Shiraz. It's a perfect way to move from Shiraz into the Cabernet bracket. James, do you think there's a bit of a resurgence for the traditional Cabernet Shiraz blend?
Yes, there are a couple of people who are trying to get Cabernet Shiraz well and truly back onto the menu. But I think it works best in intermediate climates. I'm not convinced it works well in very cool climate, but certainly for Coonawarra, I think it's a natural. Okay,
ladies and gentlemen, let's now move on to really, this is the very important wine, the 55th vintage. As I said, it's the Wynns Coonawarra Estate Black Label Cabernet Sauvignon 2010. Incredible heritage it has, and as we all know, one of the reputation as one of the most cellared wines in Australia. So, you've congratulations, by the way, 20th anniversary, which, as I said, quite an achievement. How would you describe the evolution of the black label over that period of time?
Yes, so our black label Cabernet is certainly our most important wine. It's the wine we're known for and judged by. And in recent years, we have focused a lot on the integration of the tannin and acid and of course the oak of this wine, which contributes to the texture. So you can see in this wine, albeit from a great vintage, that it's very supple and integrated. You could easily drink this wine now. Of course, with the heritage that Wynns Black Label Cabernet has, and we're approaching our 60th vintage in a couple of years, we expect the wine to age for considerable periods.
Now, Sue did mention, of course, that she's got her 60-year tasting that's actually coming up. Now, she's a little bit low. She's a little bit low on some of the vintages in the 60s, somewhere, actually anywhere between the 60s, isn't it? So there's a bit of a call to arms out there for some of you who are interested in discussing the contents of your cellars, because we've got it coming up. And so if you are holding out, and I know she's all about sort of making sure that you buy the wine, but she's actually interested in buying it back. Because I think it's quite significant. 60-year tasting is quite significant, and you need to sort of beef up your supplies a little bit.
Yes, certainly. So any of the wines between, say, 62 to 8.
Okay, let's move on to the Wynns Coonawarra Estate, the Glengyle Cabernet Sauvignon 2009 single vineyard.
This is one of our favourite vineyards. It's located south of the winery here. The vineyard has lovely deep terra rossa soil, and the vines are typically low yielding, and so that low yielding aspect means that they ripen very early. It's one of our earlier ripening vineyards, and be regarded as a fairly special site.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, now I'm going to move to our last wine of the bracket. It's the Wynns Coonawarra Estate John Riddoch Cabernet Sauvignon 2009. Obviously a flagship wine for the Wynns portfolio. The definitive John Riddoch Cabernet really is made in small quantities, as most of us know, from the best available fruit, and as we've discussed, it was an exceptional year. So, Jeremy, I'll ask you, what actually makes this particular wine such a standout for you?
I love this wine. I've been lucky to try it a few times now, and every time it's just blown me away for the fact that it unfolds slowly, as it has done today in the glass. I guess the temperature here is a bit on the chilly side, it's holding it back, but but it's just flourished, and it's deeply laid in its perfume and in its palate. And what I really love about the way John Riddoch has evolved, I think, since 1999, is towards, it's really what Sue and the whole team are all about. It's all about integration and balance and a seamless marriage of the components. And this wine just glides down. It's a big wine. And when you keep it open and look at it, you almost forget what a powerful wine it is, so artfully as it put together, and I think that's a huge strength. I've added 2 wines to my list of 5-star wines, taking a total of 23 in Australia. Those wines are both from Wynns, and they are the John Riddoch and the Michael.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that actually brings our masterclass to an end. We certainly hope you've enjoyed the discussion and been fairly enlightened as to the new releases. Would you please put your hands together and thank our panel, Sue Hodder, Jeremy Oliver, Alan Jenkins and James Halliday. And importantly, thank you very much for joining us, and to all our online guests, it's been great to have your company. We know you're at the other end. And to all our wine enthusiasts around the world, thank you very much for your continued support, and have a gorgeous afternoon. Cheers.